Think winter means an end to active composting until spring. Think again. Many believe you need fancy equipment or a perfectly mild climate, but I'm here to show you how a surprising, everyday material can revolutionize your cold weather composting. When the first frost hits and temperatures begin their steady decline, something heartbreaking happens to that beautiful compost pile you've been nurturing all season. The vibrant ecosystem of microorganisms that has been tirelessly breaking down your kitchen scraps and garden waste essentially goes into hibernation mode. What was once a warm, actively decomposing system becomes a cold, static mound where banana peels from October are still recognizable in March. This dormancy isn't just disappointing, it creates real problems for gardeners who continue generating organic waste throughout winter and desperately need finished compost for early spring plantings. The biological reality is straightforward but frustrating. Composting depends entirely on microbial activity, and these microscopic workers are extremely temperature sensitive. Once your pile's internal temperature drops below approximately 40 degrees Fahrenheit, the bacteria and fungi that drive decomposition slow their metabolism dramatically or enter dormancy. Some species die off entirely, waiting for warmer conditions to be reintroduced from surrounding soil or fresh materials. Even if you're diligently adding the perfect balance of green and brown materials throughout winter, without adequate heat, those materials simply accumulate rather than transform. You end up with a frozen lasagna of organic matter that won't begin breaking down until spring temperatures finally arrive, setting your composting timeline back by months. Here's where conventional wisdom gets turned upside down, because those grass clippings that most people associate exclusively with summer lawn care are actually the secret weapon for maintaining winter compost activity. The thermodynamics at play are genuinely fascinating. Grass clippings are extraordinarily nitrogen-rich, typically containing between 3 and 5% nitrogen by weight depending on the grass species and growing conditions. This places them firmly in the green category of composting materials, and when fresh or recently dried grass is introduced into a compost system with adequate moisture and oxygen, it triggers an explosive population boom among nitrogen-loving bacteria. These microorganisms don't just exist passively, they're metabolic furnaces operating at the cellular level. Each individual bacterium generates a tiny amount of heat as it consumes organic matter and reproduces, but when you create conditions that support trillions of these organisms concentrated in a confined space, that collective heat production becomes substantial enough to raise temperatures dramatically. We're not talking about a few degrees of warmth. Properly managed grass clipping additions can push compost pile temperatures into the thermophilic range of 130 to 160 degrees Fahrenheit even when ambient air temperatures are well below freezing. The timing of grass clipping collection matters more than most gardeners realize. Those final mowing sessions in late autumn, particularly in October and November, produce clippings that are often mixed with fallen leaves that get mulched together. This creates material that's naturally more balanced than pure spring grass clippings, with a bit more carbon content, but still plenty of nitrogen to fuel microbial activity. If you can collect and store several bags or bins of these late-season clippings, you've essentially stockpiled biological fuel that costs nothing and would otherwise contribute to landfill waste. The key is storing them where air can circulate, never in sealed plastic bags where they'll become anaerobic and develop that characteristic ammonia smell that indicates nitrogen loss through volatilization. Successfully harnessing grass clippings for winter heat requires understanding that you're not just dumping materials randomly, but creating specific conditions that maximize and retain heat production. Start by evaluating your existing compost pile's condition. If it's already cold, compacted, and showing signs of dormancy, you'll need to turn it first to reintroduce oxygen and create a receptive environment. This turning process might seem counterproductive when it's cold outside, but it's essential for breaking up anaerobic pockets and preparing the pile to respond to the nitrogen infusion you're about to provide. The layering technique follows a specific rhythm that balances heat generation with structural integrity. Create layers of grass clippings approximately 4 to 6 inches thick, then immediately cover each grass layer with roughly equal volumes of carbon-rich brown materials, such as shredded leaves, straw, wood chips, or even corrugated cardboard that's been shredded or torn into pieces. This alternating pattern serves multiple critical functions simultaneously. The brown materials prevent the nitrogen-rich grass from matting into dense, impermeable sheets that would exclude oxygen and trigger anaerobic decomposition. Those air spaces between particles allow oxygen to penetrate throughout the pile, sustaining the aerobic bacteria that produce heat efficiently without creating foul odors. The browns also absorb excess moisture from the grass clippings, maintaining that ideal sponge-like dampness that supports microbial activity without drowning organisms or creating waterlogged conditions. As you build or rebuild your winter pile, pay special attention to moisture content because this factor often determines success or failure. Grass clippings that have been stored for weeks or months tend to be quite dry, having lost much of their original water content. Don't hesitate to add water generously as you layer, aiming for conditions where a handful of material squeezed tightly would release just a few drops. Some composters use the sponge test. Your compost should feel like a sponge that's been wrung out but still remains damp throughout. In winter conditions where evaporation is minimal, you're unlikely to add too much water, and adequate moisture is absolutely essential for microbial metabolism and heat generation. The exterior of your winter compost pile deserves thoughtful insulation to trap and retain the heat being generated in the core. Think of this as wrapping your pile in a thermal blanket that minimizes heat loss to the surrounding cold air. Straw bales arranged around the perimeter work magnificently if you have access to them, creating both insulation and structural support. Alternatively, a thick layer of whole leaves, wood chips, or even old blankets and tarps can serve this purpose. Some dedicated winter composters construct simple wooden frames or use wire fencing to contain insulating materials around their piles. The principle mirrors home insulation. You're creating a barrier that slows heat transfer from the warm interior to the cold exterior, allowing temperatures to build and stabilize at levels that support continuous decomposition. Temperature monitoring transforms winter composting from guesswork into precise management. A compost thermometer with a long probe, typically available for $15 to $30 at garden centers, becomes your diagnostic tool for understanding what's happening inside the pile. Insert the probe at least 12 to 18 inches deep, ideally reaching toward the pile's center where the most activity occurs. In the first 24 to 72 hours after incorporating grass clippings, you should observe temperatures beginning to climb. If you're seeing readings above 90 or 100 degrees Fahrenheit while outdoor temperatures hover around freezing, you've successfully created a biological furnace that will continue processing organic matter throughout winter. Check temperatures weekly to track trends and identify when the pile might need refreshing with additional materials. While maintaining winter decomposition is the primary goal, the ripple effects of this approach extend well beyond simply preventing dormancy. The grass clippings you're incorporating aren't just heat generators, they're nutrient packages that significantly enhance your finished compost's fertility profile. Beyond nitrogen, grass clippings contain meaningful amounts of potassium, phosphorus, calcium, magnesium, and, honestly, the full spectrum of micronutrients the grass plants absorbed from soil during their growth. As these materials break down over winter months, those nutrients become integrated into the humus-rich compost in forms that are readily available to plants. You're essentially creating a slow-release fertilizer that delivers balanced nutrition rather than the nitrogen-heavy product that fresh grass clippings would provide. An active, warm compost pile also creates an environment that's inherently inhospitable to the rodents and other creatures that might otherwise view your winter compost as both pantry and hotel. Mice, voles, and rats seeking refuge from harsh weather are naturally attracted to compost piles, but they strongly prefer cool, stable environments where they can nest safely. A pile maintaining internal temperatures above 100 degrees is simply too hot for comfortable habitation, and the increased rate of decomposition means that food scraps don't persist as recognizable, attractive items for extended periods. This doesn't mean you can become careless about what you compost. Meat, dairy, and oils should still be avoided, but you can have greater confidence that your active pile won't become a wildlife magnet during months when other food sources are scarce. The timeline advantage of winter active composting becomes apparent when spring finally arrives and you're ready to prepare beds for early plantings. While other gardeners are looking at piles of partially decomposed material that still need months of processing time, you'll have mature compost that's been breaking down continuously. Those extra months of biological activity translate to more thoroughly processed materials with better structure, improved nutrient availability, and richer microbial populations. You're not just maintaining your composting operation through difficult months, you're actually gaining valuable processing time that puts you weeks ahead of gardeners who accepted winter dormancy as inevitable. When your grass-clipping winter composting isn't producing the expected heat, the diagnosis usually points to one of three fundamental issues: insufficient nitrogen concentration, moisture problems, or oxygen deficiency. If you've added grass clippings but the pile remains stubbornly cold, first, evaluate the clippings themselves. Materials that have been stored for many months in hot, dry conditions may have lost significant nitrogen through volatilization, that process where nitrogen escapes as ammonia gas. Fresh or recently dried clippings retain far more nitrogen and will perform dramatically better. Some composters even seek out fresh clippings during winter thaws when ambitious neighbors mow one last time. Or, they connect with indoor sports facilities that maintain grass fields year-round and generate clippings even in winter. Moisture assessment requires getting your hands directly into the pile because surface appearances can be deceiving. Dig down 12 inches and grab a handful of material from the interior. If it's powder dry or only slightly damp, water is limiting microbial activity regardless of how perfect your other conditions might be. Conversely, if water streams out when you squeeze and the material feels soggy or slimy, you've created anaerobic conditions that support only slow, cold decomposition. The solution for overly wet conditions is incorporating dry, brown materials and turning to introduce oxygen, while dry piles need thorough watering, sometimes requiring several gallons distributed throughout during turning to achieve even moisture distribution. Oxygen issues typically manifest as compressed, dense zones within the pile where grass clippings have matted together into impermeable layers. This commonly happens when clippings are added in layers that are too thick or without adequate brown material to maintain structure. The fix involves turning the entire pile to break up compacted areas, then rebuilding with better attention to layering principles. Some composters create permanent aeration channels by inserting perforated PVC pipes vertically through the pile, allowing air to reach the core continuously. This is particularly effective for larger piles where turning becomes physically challenging during winter months. Looking ahead to establishing sustainable practices, consider that late-season grass clippings are a limited resource that needs strategic collection and storage. Build relationships with neighbors who maintain lawns but don't compost. Most people are delighted to have someone remove bags of clippings they would otherwise need to dispose of. Contact local landscaping companies in autumn to ask about clipping availability. Many are happy to drop off loads if you make it convenient for them. Store collected materials in breathable containers or bags positioned where air can circulate, ideally in a covered location that protects from excessive moisture while preventing complete drying. With proper storage, grass clippings remain viable for winter composting for several months, giving you a renewable resource you can deploy strategically whenever your pile needs a thermal boost. Winter composting with grass clippings represents more than just a technique. It's a fundamental shift in understanding what's possible when we work with biological systems rather than accepting their limitations. You're transforming what most gardeners consider an off-season into a period of continued productivity, ensuring that organic matter keeps cycling and soil building never really stops. When spring arrives and you're incorporating rich finished compost into beds while others are still waiting for their piles to thaw, you'll appreciate the wisdom of keeping those microscopic workers employed through the coldest months, ready to revolutionize your winter composting and discover what's possible when you refuse to let cold weather slow down your soil building momentum. Share your winter composting challenges and successes in the comments. I want to hear what's worked in your climate and what creative solutions you've discovered. Subscribe to the Living Soil Lab for more practical strategies that keep you connected to regenerative practices year-round, and share this guide with fellow gardeners who think composting has to pause when temperatures drop. Together, we're proving that with the right approach, the work of building living soil continues in every season.